Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you the incredible journey of Alexander Morgan, a billionaire CEO who uncovers a hidden part of his past after the death of his mother. A visit to her grave leads him to a photo and a cryptic note, setting him on a path to discover a truth that shatters everything he thought he knew about his family. In this emotional story, Alexander must confront the secrets buried in his past and uncover the siblings he never knew he had. Join us as we explore themes of love, loss, and self-discovery. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe to begin today's story. I had always believed that my mother, Margaret, had given me everything she could. We had a small, humble life together. I was her only child. A truth she had told me so many times that it became a part of my identity. There were no siblings, no relatives, just the two of us, living in a small apartment in Boston, moving from one job to the next, doing whatever we could to make ends meet. For years, I had buried any curiosity about my past, thinking that my life, while far from perfect, was enough. I had grown up with my mother working long hours at a diner, often pulling double shifts just to make sure I could have what I needed. Her love was quiet but immense, filling every corner of our little world. I had always felt safe knowing she was there, even if we didn't have much else. It wasn't until the anniversary of her death that I found myself back at her grave. It had been 10 years since she passed. I had made the trip every year, though truth be told, I never felt that visiting her headstone brought me the closure I expected. It was more of a ritual, something I did to honor her. But deep down, I knew it didn't change anything. She was gone. I was alone. That morning, the air was thick with fog as I parked my car outside the cemetery gates. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the wheel as I stared at the wet grass through the windshield. It felt both like yesterday and like a lifetime ago. 10 years. It seemed like a cruel joke. The time had passed, yet I still carried the heaviness of her absence like a stone in my chest. I stepped out of the car, the earth beneath my shoes soft with the morning dew. It was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel the weight of your own thoughts. The kind that made you feel like time had stopped and you were caught in a moment that stretched on forever. I walked along the familiar path, past rows of names I didn't recognize, until I reached her grave, a polished gray stone. Her name etched in crisp serif letters, Margaret Vale, 1957 to 2015. Beloved mother. The flowers that had been left there were fresh, trimmed neatly, though they held no real meaning for me. The scent was artificial, a mere transaction done by someone from the grounds crew. It wasn't like the flowers she used to bring home, wildflowers picked from the park, each one carrying a memory of her hands and her love. No, these flowers were just part of the ritual. I stood there for a few moments, my eyes fixed on the stone, lost in the quiet, when something caught my attention. There, at the base of the headstone, just beside the roses, was a pale yellow envelope. It was worn at the edges, clearly weathered by time, but it was intact. My name was written across the front in handwriting that I immediately recognized. My mother's handwriting. I crouched down and picked it up, brushing off the dirt. There was no postage, no return address, just my name, written in the flowing, familiar script of a mother who had always written me letters, notes of encouragement, and little reminders. My heart raced as I carefully slid my thumb under the flap. Inside the envelope, there was a photo, creased and faded from age. The image stopped me cold. It was a picture of 3 babies, swaddled in matching blankets, lying side by side in a hospital bassinet. I stared at the photo for a long time. They were identical. There was no mistaking it. And one of them was me. The other 2 were strangers to me, their faces unrecognizable, but I felt something stirring deep within me. One of the babies had a tiny ink circle drawn around its face. And faintly beside it, the word, Julian, was written. My breath caught in my throat as I turned the photo over. There, on the back, in the same handwriting as the name on the envelope, were 5 words. Forgive me for the secret I kept. I stood frozen, my knees stiff. as the breeze ruffled the grass around me. My mind couldn't process what I had just seen. I had been told my whole life that I was an only child. My mother had told me that story countless times. No aunts. No uncles. No siblings. Just the two of us. The notion of having brothers, let alone identical ones, had never crossed my mind. I didn't know what to do. My hand trembled as I put the letter back in the envelope and stood up. The graveyard, the stones, the mist, it all felt like a dream. Like a cruel joke I couldn't understand. The words on that photo and the note kept swirling in my head. Forgive me for the secret I kept. It was as if my whole life had just cracked open. I had to know more. I couldn't just let this sit. Not with my mother's handwriting still fresh in my hands and the photo burning in my memory. So, I did what anyone would do when they find themselves on the edge of a cliff. Teetering between disbelief and necessity, I called Sarah. Sarah had been my assistant for 7 years. Sharp, loyal, and the only person who could crack jokes at my expense without me firing her on the spot. If anyone could help me navigate this storm of confusion, it was her. Sarah, I need you at my place now. I told her, my voice terse, not giving much away. I didn't want to explain the magnitude of it over the phone. She knew better than to ask questions. So she simply replied, on my way. Within an hour, she was at my apartment, perched on the couch with a laptop and a half-eaten protein bar. As always, she was ready to dive in without hesitation. Whatever the issue, she looked up as I entered the room and tossed the envelope onto the table without a word. Sarah opened it carefully, unfolding the photo and staring at it for a long while. Okay, wow, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this real? That's what I'm trying to find out. I said, pouring myself a whiskey. The time of day didn't matter anymore. The normal rules didn't apply when life shattered your reality so completely. She glanced at the note. Your mom wrote this, she said slowly. I nodded, though I could hardly believe it myself. I thought you were an only child. She added. I did too. I muttered, my mind racing. My mother had always been very clear about it. No brothers. No sisters. No family beyond us. Just the two of us against the world. But now, the truth felt like a heavy stone lodged deep in my chest, weighing me down with questions I wasn't sure I could bear. I sank into a chair, my mind spinning. Sarah paced a few steps, clearly trying to make sense of it. These babies are identical, she said, pointing at the photo, and one of them is you. So, who are the other two? I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The only thing I knew for sure was that my life, my very understanding of who I was, had been built on lies. I had to get to the bottom of this. I needed answers. I stood up abruptly, walking over to my desk. Let's start looking through everything she left behind. There has to be more, I said, more to myself than to Sarah. I pulled out a locked file box from the bottom drawer. Inside were personal documents, my mother's bills, her will, some hospital paperwork, and a bracelet from the day I was born. Among the scattered papers, there were no clues, no mention of siblings. The records only listed me, Alexander Morgan, as her only child. But the question that gnawed at me was whether those records could have been altered, if the right people could change the past. I turned to Sarah. Can those be changed? I asked, though the words felt hollow. She glanced at the pile of papers, tapping her fingers on the table. If you know the right people, anything can be changed, she said quietly. She paused, looking at me closely. But there's nothing here, no mention of other births, no records of siblings, just you. But that photo, that note, they didn't lie. My mother's secret was buried deep, and it was time to dig it up. I called her lawyer, David Callow, and within 2 hours, we were sitting across from him in his office. He was an older man, his hair thinning with age, and his glasses perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. She left no amendments to the will, he said, his voice careful, as though he knew we were about to dive into something we weren't prepared for. Just the original version, which you already have. I leaned forward, the silence heavy between us. What about instructions? Anything unusual? The lawyer hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the file on his desk. She did ask for one thing, he said slowly, a very specific request. Actually, she wanted an envelope placed on her headstone exactly 10 years after her death. Sarah exchanged a glance with me. What was in the envelope? She asked. David opened a folder and pulled out a thin sheet of paper. She said it would make sense to the person who found it. I felt a chill run down my spine. My mother knew I would find it. She had planned this. Even after her death, we left the lawyer's office in silence, the weight of his words pressing heavily on my shoulders. As we drove back to my apartment, I could feel Sarah's gaze on me, but I didn't have anything to say. Not yet. My thoughts were too jumbled, too chaotic. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to stop until I had answers. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying the events over and over in my mind. The photograph, the note, the quiet confession my mother had left me, nothing felt real anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know who those other two boys were and why my mother had kept this secret. And I needed to know what to do with the emptiness I felt now that everything I believed about my life had been turned upside down. I knew I had to act fast. The lawyer had told me that my mother had left no amendments to the will. No explanations, just that single, cryptic request. But that request alone was enough to send me down a path I wasn't prepared for. I couldn't do this alone. I called Sarah again, my most trusted confidant, the one person who had always been able to keep me grounded. She had already been invaluable in helping me sift through my mother's records. And now I needed her help to get to the bottom of this mystery. I found something else, Sarah said when she showed up at my apartment a few hours later. She had the same determined look in her eyes that had been there when we first started this search. In her hand was a small brown box, one that was clearly worn with age. I found this among your mother's receipts, she continued, handing me the box. It looks like she paid for a maternity home, Rose Hill Home for Mothers, back when you were born. There's no official record of it, but the address is still listed. It's in Westbridge, about an hour from here. I stared at the box in my hands. Rose Hill Home for Mothers. I had never heard of it before. There had always been gaps in the story of my birth. Things that didn't quite add up. But this was something I hadn't expected. I need to go there, I said quietly, my voice firm. The unanswered questions in my mind were becoming too loud to ignore. I couldn't wait any longer. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'll drive, she said. Let's go. The drive was long, and the closer we got to Westbridge, the heavier the silence felt. The countryside was quiet, the trees bare and skeletal as we passed. I couldn't stop my mind from racing. What was I going to find when we got there? What was waiting for me in that maternity home? We finally reached the building just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. It had once been Rose Hill Home for Mothers, but now it stood as a community center. A fresh coat of paint covering the worn brick exterior. A faded plastic banner advertising free flu shots hung in the window. And children were running and playing outside, their laughter echoing in the cool evening air. It felt like we had stepped into a different world. I hesitated at the door, but Sarah pushed past me, opening it and walking inside. Let's find someone who remembers, she said, her voice steady. We approached the front desk, where a teenager barely looked up from her phone. When I asked about the building's history, she simply pointed down the hall. You'll want Mrs. Penrose, she said, barely glancing at us. Back office, third door, probably napping. I followed Sarah down the hall, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. We knocked on the door, and after a brief pause, an elderly voice called out for us to enter. Inside, the room smelled faintly of lavender, and a small, gray-haired woman sat behind a cluttered desk, her reading glasses hanging loosely from a cord around her neck. She looked up at us, squinting for a moment before her face softened into a slow, surprised smile. My, you look just like her, she said, her voice warm. yet tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Like who? Sarah asked. Her curiosity piqued. Margaret Vale, the woman replied, her voice wistful. The beautiful girl with the 3 little angels. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. You knew her? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Penrose nodded. I remember her well. She was young, only 17 when she came here. Quiet, polite, scared out of her mind. But brave. She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. She gave birth to 3 boys. 3 identical boys. I felt my breath catch in my throat. And then what happened? I managed to ask, my voice tight. She looked at me with sorrow in her eyes. She kept 1. The other 2 were placed in closed adoptions. It broke her heart, but she didn't see another way. She begged for privacy, begged for no one to know, no one. Not even the boys themselves. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her. She never told me, I whispered, more to myself than to her. She couldn't. Mrs. Penrose replied softly. She made me promise never to speak of it. It was the only way she could live with herself. And I kept that promise. Until now. As I sat there, the weight of Mrs. Penrose's words hung in the air. For so long, I had believed that my life had been my own, unique, solitary, and complete. But the truth had cracked open a whole new world I never knew existed. I had 2 brothers, and though one was gone, the other, Robert, was still out there, living a life full of stories I had never been part of. The revelation didn't hit me all at once. It came in waves, slowly sinking in with each passing moment. Robert wasn't just a part of my past, he was part of me. A piece of the puzzle I had been missing. But there was still so much to unravel. The anger, the confusion, the quiet ache of regret, it all had to be faced. And in that moment, I understood my mother's guilt. Her silence, and the burden she carried. She had kept this secret. Not because she didn't love us, but because she had no other choice. It wasn't just about finding Robert, it was about finding a part of myself I never knew I was missing. The pieces of my life were falling into place. One by one. The days that followed were filled with more discoveries. More digging into the past. But as I stood at the edge of a new beginning, with Sarah by my side, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, this was the second chance I never knew I needed. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Life stories like this remind us that no matter how lost we may feel, there is always the possibility of finding what truly matters.